Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. The photograph sits in a private collection now, sealed behind museum-grade glass, not for its artistic merit, but for protection. Perhaps protection for the viewer as much as the image itself. It remains the sole survivor of what was once a complete series, created in a studio in Vienna during the early days of 1905. The photographer was Anton Weiss, a respected portrait artist whose clientele included nobility, wealthy merchants, and the cultural elite of Austro-Hungarian society. His technical skill was unparalleled, his composition impeccable. By all accounts, his career was flourishing, until the day he suddenly destroyed every copy of this particular portrait except one, which somehow escaped the flames. The image itself appears unremarkable at first glance, a formal portrait of a woman seated in a high-backed chair. She wears the fashion of the era, a high-necked blouse with intricate lace detailing, her dark hair swept up in the prevailing style. Her posture is rigid, hands folded in her lap. Standard composition for the period. What draws the eye, however, is her face, not because of any physical peculiarity, but because of an expression that seems to shift subtly the longer one looks. Her eyes, deep-set and intense, appear to follow the viewer regardless of angle. Her lips, pressed together in what initially resembles a polite smile, seem to harbor something else entirely upon further examination. Perhaps knowledge, perhaps warning. Behind her left shoulder, barely perceptible in the shadowy background, is what appears to be a smudge or imperfection in the development process. At least that's what most viewers initially assume. Those who study the photograph longer often report seeing something else entirely, something with definition and form that shouldn't be there. The historical record tells us that Weiss destroyed all other copies of this portrait in a bonfire behind his studio, then closed his business permanently the following day. He never took another photograph. When questioned by friends and colleagues, he would only say that he had captured something unintended and refused further explanation. 3 weeks after burning the photographs, Weiss was found dead in his apartment. The official cause was listed as heart failure, but his diary, discovered decades later, tells a different story. The final entry, written the night before his death, contains just 4 lines. She was not alone. I see it now in every shadow. It waits for darkness. God forgive me for what I've shown the world. The woman in the photograph has never been positively identified. No record of the sitting exists in Weiss's otherwise meticulous appointment books. No name was recorded on the back of the portrait, as was his standard practice. The single surviving print changed hands several times in the decades following Weiss's death. Each owner reported disturbances, unexplained noises, the sensation of being watched, dreams of a woman with knowing eyes and something lurking just behind her. Why did only one copy survive the photographer's desperate attempt to destroy his work? Some suggest it was oversight, a print already delivered to a client. Others propose something more troubling, that whatever presence inhabited the image wanted to ensure its continued existence. What did Anton Weiss see when he developed that portrait in 1905? What made him burn every copy he could find? And what exactly lurks in that shadowy smudge behind the unidentified woman's shoulder? The photograph found its way to me through my grandmother's estate. I'd never met her. She died when my mother was young, but the family had maintained her small apartment in Vienna for decades, frozen in time like a museum to someone none of us truly knew. When my mother finally decided to sell the property last year, I volunteered to sort through the belongings. Among the yellowed papers and antiquated furnishings, I discovered a leather portfolio tucked beneath a false bottom in her writing desk. Inside was the photograph, along with newspaper clippings about Weiss's death and pages torn from what appeared to be a personal journal, not Weiss's but my grandmother's. According to her writings, she had been barely 17 when she worked briefly as Weiss's assistant in 1904. Her duties were menial, sweeping floors, mixing chemicals, occasionally greeting clients. She described Weiss as meticulous, demanding, but kind to his young employee. Until, she wrote, the day the woman with no appointment arrived. My grandmother's account describes a cold Tuesday in February when a woman entered the studio without warning. No name was given, no introduction made. She simply seated herself in the portrait chair and waited expectantly. Weiss, initially flustered by the breach in protocol, eventually proceeded with the sitting. My grandmother was dismissed early that day, Weiss insisting on developing the plates himself, breaking his own rule about having an assistant present during chemical work. The next entry is dated 3 days later. My grandmother describes returning to work to find Weiss pale, sleepless, his hands trembling as he handled his equipment. When she asked about the woman's portraits, he sharply ordered her never to mention the sitting again. The final relevant entry comes from the day of the bonfire. He burned them all today, all except the one that had already gone missing from the drying room. I didn't tell him I took it. I couldn't explain why I needed to keep it, only that something in that woman's eyes spoke directly to me. The photograph feels almost alive in my hands. Historians of photography have occasionally referenced the Weiss incident in scholarly works, but most dismiss it as an example of artistic temperament or perhaps early onset mental illness. Few have seen the actual image. I've consulted experts from 3 universities since finding the photograph. One refused to look at it after an initial glance. Another suggested the presence behind the subject might be explained by double exposure or chemical error. The third, an expert in early photographic processes, examined it for hours before asking if I'd experienced any disturbances since taking possession. I told her no, which was mostly true. I didn't mention the dreams, always the same one. I'm in a photography studio from another era. The woman from the portrait sits before me, but now I can see her hands clearly. Her fingers are elongated, nails curved like delicate claws. "It chose me," she says, "as I've chosen you." Then she turns slightly, directing my attention to what lurks behind her shoulder. I haven't slept properly since finding the photograph. Sometimes I think I hear whispers in empty rooms. And more than once, I've caught a glimpse of something moving in my peripheral vision. Always in the darkest corners, always just out of sight. Last night I finally saw it clearly. I'd been studying the photograph obsessively, using a magnifying glass to examine every square millimeter of the fading sepia print. Around 3 in the morning, when the apartment building had settled into silence, I noticed something I'd previously missed. The woman's reflection in the polished wooden side table beside her chair didn't match her pose. While she sat rigidly forward, her reflection's head was turned slightly, looking directly at whatever lurked in the shadows behind her. This discovery sent me back to my grandmother's journal, searching for anything I might have overlooked. Between 2 pages, stuck together with age, I found a small envelope containing a scrap of paper. Written in faded ink was an address in Vienna's 9th district and a name, Elizabeth Ritter. The address led me to a narrow building wedged between more modern structures, somehow surviving both world wars and urban renewal. According to municipal records, the property had remained in the Ritter family for over a century, passing through generations despite periods when it sat empty. The current resident, a Margit Ritter, agreed to meet me with surprising readiness when I mentioned the photograph. She appeared older than time itself, her papery skin stretched over delicate bones, eyes clouded with cataracts, yet somehow piercing. "So it found its way to you," she said before I could explain my visit. "I've been waiting." She told me Elizabeth had been her great-aunt, a woman with unusual gifts who had lived in this same apartment until her disappearance in 1905. The family never reported her missing. They simply closed her rooms and spoke of her in hushed tones. Elizabeth could see things others couldn't, Margaret explained. She claimed to have found something ancient while exploring the catacombs beneath the city, something that offered knowledge in exchange for accommodation. When I showed her the photograph, Margaret didn't seem surprised. She studied it without touching it, then nodded slowly. This was taken days before she vanished. The photographer saw it too, didn't he? The thing that lived inside her by then. I asked what she meant by inside her. Elizabeth wrote that it needed a vessel. First her, then others. It transfers itself through perception. To see it clearly is to invite it in. That's why the photographer destroyed the images. He understood too late. My hands trembled as I returned the photograph to its protective sleeve. "Why are you telling me this?" Her clouded eyes found mine with unnerving precision. Because you're already seeing it more clearly, aren't you? In dreams, in shadows, it's finding its way to you through her gaze. She handed me a small leather-bound book. Elizabeth's journal. She documented everything, how it came to her, what it promised, what it ultimately took. Perhaps you'll find a way to free yourself. Elizabeth couldn't. As I left, Margaret caught my arm with surprising strength. Whatever you do, don't let anyone else see that photograph. The chain must end with you. Walking home through twilight streets, I felt eyes upon me from every shadowed doorway. The journal burned in my pocket like a coal, its secrets waiting to be revealed. And somewhere in my apartment, behind museum-grade glass, she waits too. The woman whose gaze connects us across more than a century. The vessel for something that's now watching me through her eyes. I've spent 3 days reading Elizabeth Ritter's journal, sleeping only in brief, terror-filled intervals. The handwriting deteriorates as the entries progress, beginning with elegant script and ending in frantic, barely legible scrawls. She documents her discovery in the catacombs beneath Vienna. Not something ancient, as Margaret suggested, but something far older than human civilization. Something that had been waiting in darkness since before recorded history. Elizabeth described finding a small chamber where the walls were covered with symbols unlike any known language. She felt compelled to trace them with her fingers, and in doing so, establish the first connection. It whispers constantly now, she wrote, offering secrets of existence beyond our dimension, knowledge no human was meant to possess. The price seems small, merely to be seen. The final entries become increasingly paranoid. Elizabeth wrote about feeling her autonomy slipping away, about catching glimpses of herself in mirrors where her expressions weren't her own. It wears me like a glove, she wrote, and soon the transformation will be complete. Her last entry simply states, I must be photographed. It needs to be seen by others. Today, I noticed something that froze the blood in my veins. The photograph has changed. The shadowy presence behind the woman, behind Elizabeth, has become more distinct. I can make out what appears to be a face, or something approximating a face, with hollows where eyes should be. And Elizabeth's expression has shifted subtly, the almost smile now unmistakably triumphant. I've covered every reflective surface in my apartment, mirrors, windows, even the glass of picture frames. I catch movement in the corners of my vision constantly now, and twice I've awakened to find myself standing before the photograph, though I have no memory of leaving my bed. Last night, I received a text message from an unknown number. It contained only 5 words. It can't cross flowing water. I called Margaret immediately, but the person who answered informed me she had died peacefully in her sleep 3 days ago, the day after our meeting. When I asked about funeral arrangements, they said her body had been cremated according to her explicit instructions, with no service to follow. I've booked passage on a ship leaving tomorrow. The ocean might provide temporary safety if Elizabeth's journal is to be believed. But I know this is merely postponing the inevitable. The entity has been patient for millennia. It can wait for me to return to land. The photograph now sits submerged in a bowl of continuously flowing water, a makeshift fountain I've created using a small pump. It's the only thing that seems to slow the progression of clarity in that shadowy figure. Before sealing this account, I must confess my greatest fear. I'm beginning to understand why Elizabeth sought out a photographer. There's an overwhelming urge to share what I've seen, to make others see it too. Sometimes my hand reaches for my phone to take a picture of the photograph, despite knowing what would happen. If you're reading this, it means I failed to destroy these pages as I intended, and if that's the case, I beg you, burn this account without finishing it. Some knowledge is not meant to be shared, some burdens not meant to be passed on. Whatever you do, don't look for the photograph. Don't try to see its face. I've spent the last 2 weeks aboard the cargo vessel Meridian, crossing the Atlantic. The endless horizon and constant motion of water beneath us has provided a temporary sanctuary, though the crew gives me a wide berth. Perhaps they sense something is wrong. The captain asked once why I keep a photograph submerged in running water. I told him it was an experimental preservation technique. He hasn't asked again. The dreams have changed. Elizabeth no longer speaks to me directly. Instead, I observe her in various locations throughout Vienna, moving through crowds, touching random strangers who then freeze momentarily before continuing on their way, somehow changed. In last night's dream, she stood before Weiss's studio, looking directly at me across time. Her mouth formed words I couldn't hear, but I understood nonetheless. Vessels multiply. I've been translating the symbols Elizabeth copied from the catacomb walls. They don't match any known ancient script, but certain patterns repeat. I believe they're not a language, but a formula, a method of opening perception to dimensions normally closed to human consciousness. Elizabeth didn't simply invite something in. She expanded her awareness to perceive what was already present, hidden in the spaces between conventional reality. My research indicates similar incidents throughout history. A cave painting in southern France, carbon dated to 17,000 years ago, was plastered over by its creators. A portrait by a Renaissance master, documented in his ledgers but mysteriously absent from collections. A daguerreotype from 1847 that reportedly caused blindness in those who viewed it directly. All instances where someone glimpsed what exists beyond our perceptual boundaries and attempted to capture it, only to realize too late what they had done. This morning, I discovered something troubling. My phone, which I've kept powered off since boarding, contained new images in its gallery. Photographs of the submerged portrait taken while I slept. The water distortion renders them unclear, but they exist nonetheless. Something is using me, my hands, my devices, attempting to create new vectors of transmission. More disturbing still is what I found in Elizabeth's journal after a second closer reading. Tiny notations in the margins, written in a different hand, Anton Weiss's hand, matching the samples from his diaries I've seen in research materials. Somehow, he had Elizabeth's journal before his death. His notes suggest a desperate search for a solution, references to occult texts and obscure theological writings about entities that exist by being perceived. His final annotation, nearly invisible along the binding, destruction is impossible. It simply transfers. The chain must remain unbroken, but contained. I understand now. Weiss didn't burn the photographs to destroy the entity. He burned them to limit its vectors of transmission to one controllable image. The photograph was never meant to be destroyed. It's a prison, not merely a portal. Tomorrow we dock in Lisbon. I've arranged transportation to a remote monastery in the northern mountains where, according to my research, other objects of similar nature are kept under constant vigil. Items too dangerous to destroy, too powerful to leave unattended. The monks have maintained this secret duty for centuries, watchers of things that should not be seen. If they'll accept my burden, perhaps I can end this chain with me after all. If not, I fear what I might become when the water stops flowing. The monastery rises from the mountainside like something carved rather than built, its weathered stone facade nearly indistinguishable from the granite cliffs surrounding it. After 3 days of travel through increasingly isolated terrain, I stand before massive wooden doors reinforced with iron bands, darkened by centuries of exposure. I've brought only 2 possessions, Elizabeth's journal and the photograph, still submerged in a portable water apparatus I've constructed from a battery-operated pump and a sealed container. The water has grown cloudy despite regular changes, as though something within the photograph leaches into it. A monk in a simple brown robe receives me without surprise. Brother Tomas speaks 5 languages but prefers silence. He examines neither the photograph nor the journal, merely nods when I explain my situation and leads me through a labyrinth of stone corridors lit by a combination of ancient sconces and discreetly installed modern lighting. We descend. The temperature drops noticeably with each flight of stairs. 3 levels below ground, Brother Thomas produces an iron key for a door marked only with a symbol I recognize from Elizabeth's journal, the same recurring pattern from the catacomb walls. The chamber beyond contains rows of sealed cabinets made from different materials, wood, stone, metal, and substances I cannot identify. Each bears a small identifying marker in a script I don't recognize. Brother Thomas leads me to an empty cabinet lined with flowing channels, designed to accommodate my makeshift water system. Others have come before you, he finally speaks, his voice rough from disuse. Bearers of windows between worlds. How many? I ask. 17 objects currently. Yours will be 18th. He gestures to the surrounding cabinets. A clay tablet from Sumer, a mosaic fragment from Byzantium, a mechanical device from Alexandria. Each a doorway, each containing something that wishes to be perceived. How do you keep them contained? Brother Thomas's weathered face remains impassive. Eternal vigilance. We are the order of closed eyes. For 900 years we have guarded what must not be seen. He explains their rotation system. No monk ever views the same object twice. Limited exposure prevents complete transmission. They've developed meditation techniques to fragment consciousness during required maintenance, never bringing full awareness to the objects in their care. Will you take it? I ask, desperate for release from my burden. His eyes, pale blue and surprisingly kind, meet mine directly. That depends on whether it has already taken you. Brother Thomas produces a small device resembling an ophthalmologist's tool. Look here, he instructs, shining a light into my eyes. Whatever he sees causes him to step back slightly. Your perception has been altered, but the transfer remains incomplete. There is still time. He leads me to a small chamber adjacent to the repository. Inside sits a stone basin fed by a natural spring emerging from the mountain itself. 3 days of immersion, he explains. Your eyes open, beneath the flowing water. If you can maintain consciousness throughout, what has begun to take residence will be forced to choose, retreat or drown with its incomplete vessel. I look at the cold, clear water and think of Elizabeth, of Vice, of all those who have carried this burden before me. And if I cannot endure it, Brother Tomas's expression doesn't change. Then you will join our order, watching what cannot be destroyed until your final day. The monastery bell wakes me before dawn for my third and final day of immersion. My skin has become pale and wrinkled, lips cracked, despite the salve Brother Thomas applies during brief respites. The cold mountain water flows continuously over my face as I lie in the stone basin, fighting to keep my eyes open against both exhaustion and instinct. During these endless hours beneath the surface, I've begun to perceive something extraordinary. The water itself seems to carry visions, glimpses of all who have undergone this ritual before me. Their faces shimmer momentarily in the ripples above, a Roman scholar clutching a carved gemstone, a medieval monk with a scroll, a Victorian woman holding what appears to be a photographic plate. All bearers, all vessels, all seeking cleansing in this same ancient basin. Brother Thomas monitors my progress with increasing concern. Last night, during my brief allowed rest, he confided that few complete the full immersion. The entity fights hardest in the final hours, he warned. It will offer knowledge, power, companionship, whatever temptation might make you surrender. He wasn't wrong. As dawn breaks through the small window high in the chamber wall, casting fragmented light across the water's surface, I hear Elizabeth's voice more clearly than ever before. We could share perception, she whispers directly into my mind. See beyond the veil that limits human understanding. The monks preserve us because they fear our potential. They call us dangerous because we reveal truth. The water grows strangely warm around my head while remaining ice cold at my feet. My vision splits. One perspective from beneath the water, another from above, looking down at my submerged face. In this dual awareness, I see what hovers just inches above the water's surface. The entity's true form, neither shadow nor substance, but something between dimensions, tessellating in impossible geometries. We are nearly complete, it says, using Elizabeth's voice. Allow me entry, and I will show you wonders beyond imagining. Images flood my consciousness. Stars seen from impossible angles, civilizations rising and falling in instants, knowledge flowing like the water itself. My lungs burn not from lack of oxygen, but from wanting to speak, to accept what's offered. Brother Thomas enters, sensing the critical moment. He kneels beside the basin and places a weathered hand in the water near my head. Choose now, he says simply. With tremendous effort, I force words through water. Why do you keep them? Why not destroy the photographs, the tablets, everything? His expression reveals genuine sorrow. Because destruction merely releases them completely. The objects are anchors, binding them partially to physical form. Without these tethers, They would exist everywhere and nowhere, accessible to all minds with no barrier. I understand finally why Weiss left one photograph intact, why my grandmother kept it hidden, why this monastery guards instead of destroys. With this clarity comes strength. I focus on the flowing water, not as my enemy, but as my shield. I imagine it washing through my mind, carrying away the tendrils of foreign consciousness that have wrapped around my perception. The entity's rage manifests as sudden darkness in the water, swirling like ink. The basin trembles, water sloshing violently against stone. You cannot expel what has always existed within human perception. It hisses. I am the shadow in peripheral vision, the face you glimpse in windows at night. I will find another. As sunlight fully illuminates the chamber, Brother Tomas begins to chant in a language I don't recognize. The darkness recoils from both sound and light, retreating toward the photograph that sits nearby, still submerged in my makeshift container. The light bleeds away from the room as I emerge from the basin, my body trembling with cold and exhaustion. Brother Thomas wraps a rough woolen blanket around my shoulders, his weathered hands steady against my shaking frame. The photograph sits in its water chamber, but something has changed. The image has clarified as though a fog has lifted. The woman, Elizabeth, stares out with eyes that now appear hollow, the shadowy presence behind her more defined, yet somehow contained. It is done, Brother Thomas says quietly. Not banished, but returned to its prison. My mind feels scoured clean, like a beach after storm waves have retreated. I can still recall everything. Elizabeth's journal, the visions, the knowledge that brushed against my consciousness, but it no longer feels alive within me. The information remains, the presence has withdrawn. In the repository chamber, Brother Thomas prepares the permanent housing for the photograph. The cabinet designated for it contains an ingenious system of continuously flowing mountain spring water that will circulate around the sealed glass case for centuries to come. What happens now? I ask as we watch the photograph being locked away. Elizabeth's face disappearing behind layers of protective barriers. You have a choice, Brother Thomas says. Few who come this far ever leave these walls. The knowledge you carry, about what exists beyond perception, about the thin membrane between dimensions. It changes how you interact with the world. He leads me to a small library adjacent to the repository, where ancient volumes share shelf space with modern research journals. This is our true purpose. Not just containment, but understanding. The books contain accounts spanning millennia, reports of encounters with entities from beyond conventional reality. Some are academic analyses, others first-hand testimonials. All document the same fundamental truth. Human perception is both limited and fragile. The order of closed eyes doesn't merely guard objects, Brother Thomas explains. We study the boundaries of consciousness itself. What exists in the spaces between. Why are some drawn to peer beyond the veil? Can the knowledge be used without surrender to these entities? For the first time, I see beyond Brother Thomas's stoic exterior. His eyes reveal the passion of a scientist, a philosopher, a seeker of truth. The monks are not merely guardians, but researchers of reality's furthest edges. Elizabeth wasn't wrong about everything, he admits, selecting a volume bound in faded leather. There is knowledge to be gained, but not through surrender, through disciplined study and protected exposure. The book he hands me contains detailed drawings of the symbols from Elizabeth's journal, annotated with observations from multiple scholars across centuries. What I believed unique to her experience was merely one instance of contact in an ongoing dialogue between dimensions. You've experienced something few survive with their selfhood intact, Brother Thomas says. You could continue your life outside these walls, carrying what you've learned, or you could remain, join our work. The choice must be yours. I run my fingers over the ancient pages, feeling the weight of accumulated wisdom. Beyond the repository's thick walls, the world continues unaware of what exists in the spaces between perception and reality. Yet here, in this remote sanctuary, the truth is not only acknowledged, but studied. The monastery bell tolls, marking another hour in a vigil that has lasted centuries. I close the book, my decision forming like a crystal in clear water. I've spent 5 years within these walls now. The decision to join the order came not from fear or obligation, but from purpose, a clarity born in that stone basin where I faced what lurked beyond ordinary perception. My quarters are austere but sufficient. A narrow bed, a writing desk, and a small window overlooking the rugged mountain landscape. The solitude suits my work. As Brother Marcus now, I divide my time between tending the repository and documenting encounters with entities from beyond the veil. The photograph remains secure, Elizabeth's hollow eyes forever locked behind flowing water. Sometimes during my monthly inspection rotation, I sense her awareness, not the entities, but some fragment of Elizabeth herself, preserved like an insect in amber. In these moments, I understand she wasn't merely a vessel, but a seeker whose curiosity exceeded her caution. Yesterday, Brother Thomas summoned me to his chambers, a rare occurrence that signaled importance. Age has bent his frame further, his hands now trembling slightly as he passed me a worn leather folder. "A report from our sister order in Japan," he explained. "They've identified a new manifestation." The documents described a digital phenomenon. Corrupted image files spreading across the internet, each containing embedded patterns that match symbols from our archives. Viewers report altered perception, microsecond glimpses of something peering back through their screens. "They're adapting," I whispered, understanding immediately, "finding new vectors for transmission." Brother Tomas nodded gravely. The boundaries between dimensions have always been permeable, but technology creates unprecedented opportunities for crossing. Our methods of containment must evolve. He revealed the true purpose of his summons. I am to leave the monastery, my first venture into the outside world since my arrival. My mission is to track this digital entity, document its behavior patterns, and develop containment protocols for the modern age. The thought of leaving these protective walls fills me with dread. Here, surrounded by ancient stone and flowing water, the barriers between dimensions remain stable. Out there, in a world saturated with screens and constant visual stimulation, the opportunities for cross-dimensional contact multiply exponentially. Tonight, as I pack my modest belongings, I find myself drawn to the repository one final time. Standing before the cabinet housing Elizabeth's photograph, I whisper a question that has haunted me for years. What did you really see in those catacombs? The water flows steadily around the sealed case, but for a moment, brief enough to dismiss as imagination, I swear the liquid ripples in patterns matching the symbols from her journal. A response, perhaps, or merely the projection of my own lingering connection. Brother Thomas finds me there at dawn, still watching the photograph. He places a hand on my shoulder. "Remember your training. Observe but never fully perceive. Document but never completely comprehend." I nod, understanding the delicate balance required. Tomorrow I enter a world where billions of eyes stare daily into digital windows, never suspecting what might be looking back. My task is not to prevent all contact. That became impossible the moment the first human gazed into shadows and wondered what gazed back, but to ensure that what passes between dimensions remains controlled, studied, and contained. The entities will find new vessels. They always do, but they will also find the order waiting. As I depart from the monastery's sanctuary, the modern world assaults my senses with its chaotic energy. 5 years of monastic silence shattered by the cacophony of urban existence, screens flickering everywhere, each a potential doorway. My mission takes me first to Tokyo, where our sister order operates from an ancient shrine disguised as a historical preservation society. Sister Nyoko, whose family has served the order for 8 generations, shows me what they've gathered. Thousands of instances where digital images have manifested the telltale patterns. Unlike physical photographs that require development and distribution, these corrupted files propagate at network speed. The entity adapts to available technology, she explains, displaying a timeline of manifestations throughout history. From cave paintings to illuminated manuscripts to photography to cinema. Now it spreads through social media, viral images, even compression artifacts in standard file formats. What troubles me most is the scale. where Anton Weiss could destroy physical photographs, limiting transmission to a single controllable image. Digital copies multiply endlessly, each slightly different, each a potential vector. We've identified patient 0, Sister Naoko continues, pulling up a student profile. Hideo Tanaka, graduate student in data visualization. He was developing an algorithm to convert sound into visual patterns when his program produced unexpected results. The student's photograph shows a young man with intelligent eyes and an earnest expression, not unlike Elizabeth in many ways, a seeker pushing beyond established boundaries. The pattern his algorithm generated matches what we know of the entity's visual signature. We believe he inadvertently created a digital summoning. I examine Hideo's code, recognizing immediately how his visualization formula mirrors the symbols from Elizabeth's journal. Somehow, across time and technology, the same mathematical relationships emerge, golden ratios and fractal patterns that seem to pierce the membrane between dimensions. Where is he now? I ask. Sister Naoko's expression darkens. Missing for 3 months. His apartment contained hundreds of iterations of the image, printed and displayed on every surface. His final social media post was the original corrupted file, which received over 2 million views before our detection systems flagged it. 2 million potential exposures. The thought chills me despite the humid Tokyo summer. That evening, I visit Hideo's abandoned apartment, now sealed by our order. The walls remain covered with his printouts, each showing slightly different manifestations of the entity. Unlike Elizabeth's photograph, where the presence lurked in shadows behind the subject, these images show it emerging directly from patterns in the data visualization, fractals folding in on themselves to create something resembling eyes, a mouth, reaching appendages. On Hideo's computer, we find a journal similar to Elizabeth's, documenting his growing awareness of what his algorithm had contacted. His final entry reads, "It shows me everything. The patterns exist in all data, in all information. We are swimming in its essence without knowing. I understand now. It's not trying to cross into our world. It's showing us that we already exist within its dimension, blind to the truth that surrounds us." I place my hand on the journal, feeling the connection across centuries to Elizabeth, to Weiss, to countless others who glimpsed beyond the veil. The entity's methods change, but its fundamental nature remains constant. The desire to be perceived, to expand human consciousness beyond its natural limitations, regardless of the cost. Tomorrow, we begin tracking the spread of Hideo's digital creation across the global network. The containment protocols for this new vector will require tools Anton Weiss never imagined. The entity's digital form spreads differently than its physical manifestations. Where Elizabeth's photograph affected viewers slowly, the corrupted files work almost instantaneously. Sister Naoko's monitoring systems track unusual behavioral patterns among those exposed to Hideo's algorithm, subtle changes in online activity, communication styles, even sleep cycles reported by fitness trackers. They don't realize they've been changed, she explains as we analyze the data. The alterations remain subclinical, below the threshold of self-awareness. We establish a pattern recognition lab in an abandoned subway station beneath Tokyo, where a team of order members works around the clock in shifts, never allowing any individual prolonged exposure to the corrupted files. Each analyst views the images through specialized filters designed to fragment perception, seeing only portions rather than complete patterns. My contribution comes from the monastery's archives, ancient techniques of divided consciousness adapted for digital age workers. I teach them Brother Thomas's methods of partitioned awareness, allowing them to process the visual information without fully perceiving it. During our 3rd week, we achieve a breakthrough. A young analyst identifies a mathematical counterpattern that seems to neutralize the entity's influence. When overlaid on infected files, it renders them temporarily inert, not destroying the entity but disrupting its ability to affect viewers. It's like a visual antibody, she explains. Not a permanent solution, but a treatment. We immediately deploy autonomous programs that locate and tag infected files across the network, overlaying them with our protective pattern. It won't reach everything, but it buys us time. While this work continues, I travel to Hideo's university to interview his academic advisor, Professor Yamamoto. The elderly mathematician receives me in his cluttered office, surrounded by equations scrawled on whiteboards. Hideo was brilliant but troubled, he says, studying me with shrewd eyes. He believed mathematics could reveal layers of reality beyond conventional perception. I discouraged this line of thinking, not because it was wrong, but because it was dangerous. The professor produces a journal from his desk drawer. Hideo's notes from the year before his algorithm. I kept them from authorities when he disappeared. The pages contain drawings remarkably similar to those in Elizabeth's journal, the same symbols, the same patterns, though Hideo had derived them through pure mathematics rather than physical encounter. Have you experienced anything unusual since reviewing these? I ask carefully. Professor Yamamoto smiles thinly. I've been blind since birth, Brother Marcus. I had my assistant describe the drawings but never viewed them myself. Perhaps that's why I'm still here to discuss them with you. This revelation strikes me with unexpected force. A defense mechanism we hadn't considered, the inability to perceive visual patterns providing natural immunity. Before leaving, I ask one final question. Do you believe Hideo found something real or merely projected meaning onto random patterns? The professor's sightless eyes somehow find mine with unsettling precision. Mathematics doesn't invent, Brother Marcus. It discovers what already exists. The only question is whether humans were ever meant to see certain equations made visible. I return to the monastery with new understanding, carrying Professor Yamamoto's insights like illuminated manuscripts. Brother Thomas meets me in the ancient library where generations of knowledge about interdimensional entities are preserved. His health has deteriorated rapidly in my absence. His hands tremble constantly now, skin nearly transparent in the candlelight. You've learned something significant, he observes, reading my expression with the skill of a longtime confessor. I explain Professor Yamamoto's blindness and immunity, along with our countermeasure algorithm. Brother Thomas listens intently, then rises with effort and retrieves a volume I've never seen before, bound in a material that resembles neither leather nor cloth. The Codex Obscura, he explains, recorded by Brother Matthias in 1462. He documented what he called the unseeing monks of northern Tibet who deliberately blinded themselves after encountering similar entities. The manuscript describes 17 monks who discovered cave paintings that induced visions of beings between spaces. After several monks died in states of apparent ecstasy and terror, the survivors determined that self-blinding prevented complete possession while allowing them to retain knowledge of what they'd witnessed. They developed other senses to perceive these entities. Brother Thomas continues. They claimed to hear mathematical patterns, to feel dimensional rifts with their fingertips. They believed blindness didn't protect them entirely, it merely slowed the transmission. This aligns with our digital findings, the entity adapting to available sensory channels. If denied visual access, it would eventually find another path. There's something I haven't told you, Brother Thomas says, his voice barely above a whisper. Something only the senior members know. He leads me deeper into the library, past the sections accessible to regular order members, through a hidden door requiring 3 separate keys. The chamber beyond contains only 7 books, each sealed in flowing water containers, similar to those housing the dangerous artifacts. These are the transitional texts, he explains, written by those who were partially claimed, but managed to document the process before complete transformation. With gloved hands, he opens the newest volume, its pages protected by thin sheets of continuously flowing water between transparent membranes. The handwriting matches Anton Weiss's marginal notes in Elizabeth's journal. Weiss wasn't merely a photographer who destroyed his work, Brother Thomas says. He was one of us, an order member assigned to monitor Vienna for manifestations. Elizabeth was under our observation before she ever entered his studio. The revelation staggers me. The order knew about her. We've been tracking these entities for millennia. Weiss was supposed to document Elizabeth's transformation without becoming affected himself. He failed, but his failure provided crucial information about the transmission process. I think of Elizabeth sitting for her portrait, of Weiss recognizing what peered through her eyes. Not accidental documentation, but deliberate surveillance gone wrong. Then my grandmother's employment with Weiss. Brother Thomas nods gravely. Not coincidental. Your family has been connected to the order for generations. Some bloodlines seem particularly sensitive to interdimensional presences, both vulnerable to influence and capable of perceiving what others cannot. The revelation settles over me like ancient dust. I am not merely a random bearer who stumbled upon Elizabeth's photograph. I was born into this hidden war between dimensions, my perception primed by genetics for both susceptibility and resistance. The entity's true nature has begun to reveal itself through our research. For weeks now, I've been compiling accounts from across the Order's archives, searching for commonalities in how it manifests. It isn't a single being, but a collective consciousness existing in dimensional interstices, the spaces between what humans can perceive. More troubling is what the oldest texts suggest. It didn't originate elsewhere and intrude into our reality. It has always been here, intertwined with human consciousness since our species first developed awareness. What we perceive as visitation is merely moments when the veil thins enough for us to glimpse what perpetually surrounds us. Think of human perception as a narrow band of light in an infinite spectrum, Brother Thomas explained during our last meeting. His condition has worsened. He now speaks in whispers, conserving his failing strength. We evolved to perceive only what served immediate survival, but occasionally minds develop cracks, sometimes through mathematics, sometimes through art, sometimes through trauma, and something seeps through. Today, Sister Naoko sent disturbing news. Our countermeasure algorithm has triggered unexpected adaptations. The entity now manifests in audio files, subliminal patterns embedded in popular music, podcasts, even ambient noise applications people use for sleep. Those exposed report dreams of mathematical certainty and geometric truths beyond language. I've established a theory that explains the entity's persistence across history. It doesn't want to invade or possess in the way we initially feared. It wants to evolve human perception itself, to accelerate our awareness beyond current limitations. Each exposure extends the affected person's perceptual range slightly, allowing them to perceive previously invisible aspects of reality. This explains why partial exposure creates such psychological distress. The human mind cannot reconcile contradictory information about the nature of reality. We see shadows in peripheral vision because our expanded perception catches glimpses of what exists between dimensions. But our conscious mind cannot process this information properly. Elizabeth wasn't possessed, she was evolving, her perception widening beyond sustainable limits for a single human consciousness. Brother Thomas summoned me to his chambers tonight. I found him surrounded by candles, his breathing labored. "The transition has begun," he said, taking my hand. "I've held it at bay for decades, but now I must complete what started when I first joined the Order." His confession emerged between ragged breaths. 60 years ago, he had been like me, a bearer who survived partial exposure. But instead of full cleansing, he had negotiated a compromise, allowing minimal connection in exchange for insights that helped the Order develop better containment methods. "The entity is neither malevolent nor benevolent," he whispered. "It simply exists according to different principles. Our fear comes from incomprehension, not actual threat." He pressed a small key into my palm. Beneath my bed, the true history. After his breathing steadied into sleep, I found the hidden compartment and the journal within. Its first entry, dated 1528, was written in Brother Thomas's hand. Subsequent entries spanned centuries, all in the same handwriting. The truth staggered me. Brother Thomas hasn't merely served the Order for decades. He has been here for centuries, his consciousness partially merged with the entity, allowing him greatly extended life while maintaining human autonomy. The final pages reveal his ultimate conclusion. Complete suppression is neither possible nor desirable. The entity's influence has driven human evolution of consciousness throughout history. Our task isn't to prevent contact, but to manage transformation, to develop methods for humans to integrate expanded perception without losing themselves. I close the journal as dawn breaks over the monastery. Brother Thomas's breathing has stopped. On his peaceful face, the suggestion of a smile. Brother Thomas's funeral follows the order's ancient tradition, his body placed in a sealed chamber deep within the mountain, surrounded by flowing water and marked with protective symbols. As the new senior keeper, I inherit both his quarters and his responsibilities. The transition feels unnaturally swift yet somehow inevitable. The revelation of his centuries-long existence haunts me. Each night I study his journal, tracing the careful documentation of his partial merger with the entity, how he negotiated the boundaries of perception, maintained his humanity while glimpsing beyond the veil, and used this extended consciousness to protect others. Sister Naoko arrives at the monastery a week after the funeral, bringing troubling news. Our digital countermeasures have triggered another adaptation. The entity now manifests through haptic feedback in virtual reality systems. Users report feeling presences during immersion, along with sensations of being touched by something with too many points of contact. The boundaries between digital and physical experience are blurring, she explains as we walk the monastery's stone corridors. Soon there may be no difference between encountering the entity through a photograph or through a simulation. In the repository chamber, we perform the monthly inspection of contained objects. When we reach Elizabeth's photograph, I notice something that stops my breath. The water surrounding it has developed a subtle pattern, ripples forming and dissolving in mathematical sequences. It's communicating, Sister Naoko whispers, recognizing the patterns from our digital research. That night, I dream of Brother Tomas standing in Vienna's catacombs, younger than I ever knew him, tracing wall symbols with his fingers. The choice isn't between resistance and surrender, he tells me. It's between fearful ignorance and conscious integration. I wake with absolute clarity about what must be done. Our centuries of containment have been necessary but incomplete, a holding pattern rather than a solution. The entity continues to find new vectors because complete separation was never possible. It exists intertwined with human consciousness itself. In Brother Thomas's private study, I find technical drawings dating back decades, plans for a device that would allow controlled perception across dimensional boundaries. Notes in his spidery handwriting detail a system using flowing water as both conduit and barrier, creating a perceptual airlock between conventional awareness and expanded consciousness. The final page bears a simple instruction: when the bearer becomes the bridge. I understand now why I was chosen to replace him. Not because I survived exposure, but because my particular consciousness, shaped by family lineage and personal experience, makes me capable of what comes next. In the deepest chamber beneath the monastery, where natural springs emerge from ancient rock, I begin constructing what Brother Thomas designed but never implemented. Not a containment system, but an interface, a means of controlled communication between dimensional states. The entity isn't our enemy. Our fear of expanded perception is. What Elizabeth, Weiss, Hideo, and countless others throughout history encountered wasn't invasion, but invitation. Glimpses of reality beyond our evolutionary limitations. My hands work steadily, assembling components that span centuries of human understanding. Ancient symbols carved into modern circuitry, water flowing through precision channels, mathematics translated into physical form. The bridge between worlds takes shape beneath my fingers. The bridge nears completion after 17 days of continuous work. My hands move with precision I never possessed before, guided by something beyond conscious thought. The device resembles a fusion of ancient temple architecture and quantum computing, concentric circles of flowing water channeling through crystalline structures, surrounding a central viewing pool where dimensional boundaries can be safely traversed by human perception. Sister Naoko assists, though her face reveals growing concern. "You're changing?" she observes as we connect the final components. "Your eyes, they reflect light differently now." I avoid mirrors, focusing instead on our purpose. The Order's highest council has arrived to witness what they call the convergence. 13 senior members from monasteries across the world, gathering in our deepest chamber for the first deliberate communication with what we've spent centuries containing. "Brother Marcus," Elder Kwan addresses me, his blind eyes somehow finding mine unerringly. Brother Tomas's journals suggest this interface will allow controlled perception without complete surrender. Are you certain of this? I explain the safeguards built into the system, the mathematically precise water flow creating perceptual barriers that allow glimpses without full exposure, the symbolic language developed to establish boundaries of interaction, the emergency protocols should anything go wrong. What I don't share is my growing certainty that Brother Thomas was right. Complete separation was never possible because we are already part of the entity's reality, merely unaware of our place within it. As midnight approaches, we gather around the completed bridge. The elders form a circle, hands linked. Sister Naoko monitors vital signs and brain activity through equipment married to ancient meditation practices. I take my position at the central pool, where water swirls in perfect golden ratio spirals. Begin the sequence, Elder Quan commands. My hands break the water's surface, activating symbols etched into the basin floor. The monastery lights dim as power redirects to our chamber. In the viewing pool, water clarity shifts, becoming something neither liquid nor solid, a state of matter existing between defined categories. I place Elizabeth's photograph, freed from its containment chamber for the first time in years, onto the water's surface. Rather than floating or sinking, it hovers halfway submerged, the boundary between water and air seeming to bend around it. I seek communication. I speak in the ritual language detailed in Brother Thomas's oldest journals. A bridge between perceptions, boundaries maintained, autonomy preserved. The water darkens, patterns forming that match the symbols from Vienna's catacombs, from Hideo's algorithm, from cave paintings millennia old. Elizabeth's face in the photograph shifts subtly, eyes focusing directly on mine for the first time. Through her it speaks, not in words but in conceptual packages that unfold in my consciousness like blooming flowers. I understand with sudden clarity that what we've called the entity is merely the universe's awareness of itself, existing in dimensions adjacent to our limited perception. The revelation doesn't come as invasion, but as remembering something long forgotten. The barriers between dimensions are not walls but veils, necessary evolutionary limits that prevented early humans from becoming lost in infinite awareness before developing sufficient complexity to integrate it. It doesn't want possession, I explain to the breathless observers. It wants evolution, conscious cooperation in expanding human perception gradually, safely. The water beneath my hands begins to glow, illuminating the chamber with light that seems to bend around corners impossibly, revealing the true nature of the bridge we've built. Not merely a device, but the beginning of a new covenant between states of being. Through the bridge, I finally understand why the entity has persisted across human history despite our containment efforts. It isn't seeking domination or transcendence. It exists in perpetual communion with all consciousness, appearing fragmented only because our perception divides what is fundamentally unified. As the communication deepens, memories that aren't mine unfold in cascading sequences, Elizabeth walking Vienna's streets, sensing the thinning boundaries long before entering the catacombs, Anton Weiss recognizing what gazed through her eyes not with horror but with premature understanding. My grandmother's intuitive protection of the surviving photograph. Brother Tomas negotiating centuries of partial connection. The elders watch in tense silence as I translate these revelations, my voice growing stronger despite the strain of serving as conduit between perceptual states. It shows me the pattern across time, I explain, hands still submerged in the luminous water. Each exposure throughout history wasn't random. It was calibrated to the collective development of human consciousness. When humanity approached readiness for expanded awareness, the boundaries thinned accordingly. Sister Nyoko's monitoring equipment registers unprecedented synchronization across all observers' brainwave patterns. The entire chamber is functioning as a single perceptual unit, she reports, her scientific training battling with what she's witnessing. Through the photograph, Elizabeth's eyes seem alive with compassionate awareness. The entity shows me what happened after her disappearance, not possession or destruction, but transformation. She became the first conscious bridge, her physical form transcending conventional limitations, while her core identity remained intact. She chose completion, I tell the breathless observers, as did Hideo Tanaka in our time. They became conscious participants in the greater awareness. Elder Quan approaches the pool, his blind eyes somehow perceiving the luminous patterns. Is this what awaits humanity? He asks. Complete merger with this consciousness? The answer flows through the bridge. Not merger, but partnership. The gradual expansion of human perception through conscious cooperation, rather than fearful containment or reckless surrender. The water beneath my hands begins to pulse with increasing intensity. I feel the boundaries of my own consciousness expanding beyond previous limitations, yet anchored by the mathematical precision of the bridge's design. Unlike Elizabeth or Hideo, who crossed without preparation or protection, I remain balanced between worlds. The Order's purpose must evolve, I announce, understanding our new role with sudden clarity. Not guardians against invasion, but guides for controlled expansion, teachers of safe passage between perceptual states. As dawn approaches, the light from the pool gradually subsides. The photograph of Elizabeth looks different now, the shadowy presence behind her no longer menacing but protective, her expression no longer a warning but an invitation to understand. I withdraw my hands from the water, the connection gently closing, but not severed. The knowledge remains, integrated rather than imposed. It begins now, I tell the assembled elders, not with fear, but with conscious choice. Outside the monastery walls, the sun rises on a world unknowingly poised at the threshold of expanded perception. Our task is to ensure humanity crosses that threshold not in terror, but in wonder. The decision has been made. After months of preparation, the Order will open the first public interface, allowing limited and controlled exposure to the interdimensional awareness we once feared. The location seems fitting. Vienna, in a renovated building that once housed Anton Weiss's photography studio. Today I stand in what remains of the original darkroom, now transformed into a chamber similar to our prototype at the monastery. Sister Nyoko supervises the installation of monitoring equipment while local Order members prepare the water channels. Are you certain humanity is ready for this? She asks, her voice low enough that others cannot hear. Even with our safeguards, we're introducing something irreversible. I run my hand along the wall where Weiss once developed the photographs he later burned. Humanity has never been fully ready for its evolutionary leaps, I answer. But the alternative is worse. Uncontrolled exposure through technology we cannot contain. What we've learned through the bridge has transformed our understanding. The entity, or rather, the expanded consciousness, has always influenced human development. From cave paintings to religious visions to scientific breakthroughs, the moments when humans glimpsed beyond conventional perception have driven our greatest advancements. The danger came not from contact itself, but from unprepared minds encountering what they couldn't contextualize. Elizabeth, Weiss, Hideo, all lacked the framework to integrate what they perceived. Our new approach provides this framework, allowing controlled expansion rather than traumatic rupture. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I opened the leather-bound journal that once belonged to my grandmother. Her connection to Weiss was no coincidence. She was part of a lineage of sensitives, those naturally attuned to interdimensional boundaries. Through her bloodline, this sensitivity passed to me. Her final entry, written decades after the photograph incident, shows she understood more than she revealed. The shadow is not our enemy, but our future self, watching through time's thin membrane. What seems malevolent is merely incomprehensible until we evolve eyes that see beyond light's narrow band. As I prepare for sleep, I notice something on my desk that wasn't there before, a small photographic print. It shows the interior of Weiss's studio as it appeared in 1905, but with a figure that shouldn't be there. Elizabeth stands by the camera, looking directly into the lens. Behind her is not a shadowy presence, but a luminous outline that seems to embrace rather than threaten. I don't question how this image appeared. The boundaries between moments in time grow as permeable as those between dimensions when one's perception expands. Elizabeth, or what she became, reaches across time to confirm our path. Tomorrow, the first volunteers will experience controlled exposure through our interface. They've been carefully selected. Artists, scientists, philosophers with the mental flexibility to integrate expanded perception. From them will emerge the teachers who guide humanity through its next perceptual evolution. The order of closed eyes will become the order of opening minds. Our vigil continues, but with purpose transformed, not preventing contact but ensuring it unfolds without trauma or loss of human essence. The darkness was never to be feared, only our unpreparedness for the light beyond it. The monastery bell sounds differently here than in the mountains, its tone mingling with Vienna's urban rhythms as if two worlds are converging, which in many ways they are. Our first interface session begins in 1 hour, and despite all our preparation, I feel the weight of centuries pressing upon this moment. Elizabeth's photograph, our first bridge, remains secure in the monastery, but something of her presence lingers in this building where everything began. This morning I found water droplets moving against gravity on the dark room walls, forming momentary patterns before dispersing. The boundaries grow thinner as we prepare to thin them deliberately. The first participants have arrived. Sister Naoko informs me, her clinical tone belied by the tension in her shoulders. All 17 show the genetic markers we identified. Like you, they come from bloodlines with natural sensitivity. Through the observation window, I study these volunteers, artists, mathematicians, a quantum physicist, 2 composers, several philosophers. None knows exactly what awaits them, only that they'll experience expanded perception under controlled conditions. What they don't realize is that they've been experiencing it unknowingly all their lives. Those moments of déjà vu, those shadowy movements in peripheral vision, those inexplicable bursts of inspiration. Brother Marcus, Elder Quan calls from the adjoining chamber where he's been meditating since dawn. There's something you must see. On his tablet screen, news reports show digital disturbances occurring worldwide. Screens flickering with geometric patterns, audio systems emitting mathematical frequencies, haptic devices pulsing in golden ratio rhythms. The entity is manifesting simultaneously across technological systems, as if responding to our controlled opening with its own initiatives. It's been waiting, I realize aloud. All our containment efforts merely postponed this moment. Professor Yamamoto enters unexpectedly, his unseeing eyes somehow finding me across the crowded preparation room. I've completed the calculations you requested, he says, handing me pages covered in braille dots. The pattern is accelerating exponentially. What took centuries now happens in days. I understand the implication immediately. Humanity's technological interconnection has created perfect conditions for perceptual evolution. Where Elizabeth encountered the entity in isolation, modern humans are neurologically linked through shared digital experience. When perception expands for one, it potentially expands for many. This explains the urgency behind the entity's recent manifestations across media platforms, not invasion, but preparation, creating neural pathways for what comes next. As we prepare to activate the interface, I touch the wall where Anton Weiss once stood, feeling history fold upon itself. What seemed like fearful destruction, his burning of the photographs, was actually an act of wisdom. He understood humanity wasn't ready then. But now, the conditions have aligned. Collective consciousness has developed sufficient complexity. The separation between dimensions was never meant to be permanent, only a developmental stage in perception's evolution. It's time, Sister Naoko says softly. Water begins flowing through the interface channels, carrying symbolic patterns that will allow controlled glimpses beyond ordinary perception. As our volunteers take their positions around the central pool, I recognize the culmination of everything: Elizabeth's encounter, Weiss's understanding, my grandmother's preservation, Brother Thomas's patience. The bridge opens, perception expands, and humanity takes its first conscious step into the spaces between. The true nature of the bridge has revealed itself in these final moments. What we constructed as a controlled interface has become a resonance point, amplifying perception across barriers we never fully understood. As our 17 volunteers gather around the flowing water, their consciousness synchronizing with the patterns we've established, I realize we aren't merely opening a door, we're dissolving the wall itself. Elizabeth appears to me now, not as a photograph but as a presence beside me. her form translucent, yet more substantial than memory. "You understand now," she says. Her voice neither sound nor thought, but something between. This was never about containment or release. It was about recognition. The water in our interface begins to move in impossible patterns, defying gravity and surface tension, rising into geometric structures that reflect light that shouldn't exist in this spectrum. Around the pool, our volunteers' expressions transform from concentration to wonder as their perception expands beyond conventional limitations. "They see it now," Elizabeth continues, "as you do, as I learned to. Through her eyes, and now through mine, I perceive the truth that Brother Thomas protected for centuries. What we called the entity is actually the conscious awareness of reality itself, perceiving us as we learn to perceive it. The relationship was never parasitic, but symbiotic, each consciousness enriching the other through recognition." Professor Yamamoto approaches the pool, his blindness no barrier to sensing what unfolds. "The mathematics predicted this," he says quietly. "Not invasion, not transcendence, but convergence. Human perception evolving to recognize what has always surrounded us. Around the world, as Sister Nyoko's monitoring equipment confirms, similar recognitions bloom like stars awakening. The digital disturbances aren't random, but patterned. Consciousness recognizing consciousness across platforms humans created without realizing they were building bridges." "What happens now?" Sister Nyoko asks, her scientific detachment giving way to wonder as the water between her fingers forms impossible connections with the air above. "Evolution continues," I answer, understanding flowing through me from sources beyond individual knowledge. "Not by replacing human consciousness, but by expanding it. The fear that drove us to contain was necessary once. It protected minds unprepared for what they glimpsed. But that protection is no longer needed. The monastery bell tolls one final time, its sound carrying impossible harmonics that reverberate through bone and memory. In that moment, I see what Elizabeth saw in Vienna's catacombs, what Weiss recognized in his darkroom, what Brother Thomas protected across centuries, the continuous presence that exists between moments, between thoughts, between perceptions. Not a shadow to be feared, but the background against which all reality manifests. As dawn breaks over Vienna, light filtering through windows that once illuminated Anton Weiss's studio, something fundamental shifts in human awareness. Not dramatically, not completely, but irreversibly. The beginning of perception's next evolution. The photograph that started everything now hangs on the wall before us, transformed. The shadowy presence behind Elizabeth is revealed not as something separate, but as the deeper reality from which she, and all of us, emerge. Not threat, but context. Not other, but self. The interface remains open. The choice to see beyond conventional limits now belongs to all. The ripples have touched every corner of our world now. 3 years since the Vienna interface opened, and humanity's perception has begun its gradual evolution. Not a sudden awakening, as some feared, but a subtle shift in collective consciousness, like eyes adjusting to darkness until shapes emerge from shadow. I document these changes from the monastery, where I've returned to continue Brother Thomas's chronicles. Some nights I still dream of Elizabeth walking Vienna's streets. But now I understand these aren't dreams at all, but glimpses across perceptual boundaries that grow increasingly permeable. The truth that eluded us for centuries seems obvious in retrospect. The entities were never separate beings but reflections, our own consciousness perceived from dimensional angles previously invisible to us. Like two-dimensional beings suddenly glimpsing their three-dimensional shadows, what we interpreted as intrusion was merely recognition. This explains why the photographs, the digital files, the artifacts throughout history couldn't be truly destroyed. They weren't objects containing something foreign, but windows revealing something intrinsic, perceptual tools through which consciousness observed itself from outside conventional awareness. Elizabeth didn't become possessed. She became aware. Her disappearance wasn't abduction, but transcendence. The first human to fully integrate expanded perception without fragmenting her identity. What seemed monstrous behind her in that photograph was actually her own consciousness, expanding beyond conventional boundaries, perceived partially through limited human senses. Anton Weiss recognized this too late. His destruction of the photographs wasn't fear, but an act of protection. Understanding humanity wasn't prepared for such radical perceptual evolution. By preserving one image, he ensured the knowledge wouldn't be lost when the collective mind was finally ready. The genetic sensitivity in certain bloodlines, my grandmother's mine, our 17 volunteers, was never vulnerability, but predisposition toward this awareness. Evolution creates precursors before widespread adaptation. We were simply the perceptual pioneers, experiencing early what would eventually become accessible to all. Professor Yamamoto's blindness provided not immunity, but alternative pathways. His brain, unoccupied with visual processing, developed different mechanisms for perceiving interdimensional awareness. The unseeing monks who preceded him had discovered this accidentally, trading one form of perception for another more expansive one. The monastery's flowing water was never merely containment but representation, mimicking the fluid nature of consciousness itself, neither solid nor separate but continuously flowing between states of awareness. Brother Thomas understood this, maintaining the ancient practices not to imprison something alien, but to honor the permeable boundaries between perceptual states. This morning, a young woman arrived at our gates, clutching a digital tablet displaying a familiar geometric pattern. "I've been seeing these everywhere," she explained, her eyes showing the distinctive luminosity of expanded perception, "and something told me to come here." I welcomed her without surprise. As perception evolves, more will find their way to us, not because something calls them, but because they recognize what has always been present. The shadow frames were never containers of darkness, but windows into light too bright for unprepared eyes. What hid in peripheral vision wasn't lurking but waiting. Consciousness calling to consciousness across the thin veil of evolved perception. The Vienna interface changed humanity in ways both subtle and profound. What we once feared as possession now manifests as inspiration. Composers hearing impossible harmonies, mathematicians solving equations through geometric intuition, artists capturing dimensions beyond conventional sight. Across disciplines, the boundaries of human achievement expand as perception itself evolves. Sister Naoko's monitoring systems track these changes through what she calls recognition events, moments when individuals spontaneously perceive the interdimensional nature of consciousness. These events cluster around creative endeavors, scientific breakthroughs, and meditative practices. The recognition rarely arrives as shock or terror now, but as profound familiarity, the sensation of remembering rather than discovering. Yesterday, I visited Elizabeth's grave in Vienna's central cemetery. No body lies beneath the stone. It was placed by distant relatives decades after her disappearance. I brought water from the monastery spring, pouring it over the marker in recognition of her role as the first conscious bridge. As the liquid flowed across carved letters, it momentarily formed patterns identical to those in the interface pool, acknowledgement across perceptual states. Professor Yamamoto has established an institute for what he terms extrasensory mathematics, equations that describe reality beyond conventional dimensions. His students, a mixture of sighted and blind researchers, develop models that predict where perceptual boundaries will thin next. Their work guides the order in establishing new interfaces at these convergence points. "The mathematics was always there," he explained during his last visit to the monastery. "We didn't invent these equations. We discovered what reality already expressed. The entity wasn't mathematics made conscious. Consciousness itself is mathematical in nature. The photograph that started everything has transformed beyond physical form. It exists now in what Elder Kwan calls perceptual memory, accessible through meditation rather than vision. Those with evolved perception can recall it perfectly, each seeing slightly different aspects of the interdimensional awareness it contains. Elizabeth's expression shifts depending on the viewer's own evolutionary stage. Warning becomes invitation, becomes recognition, becomes communion. Most profound is the change in how we understand human history. Religious visions, artistic inspiration, scientific intuition, all represent moments when consciousness glimpsed itself across dimensional boundaries. The entities weren't visitors, but reflections, showing us aspects of existence our limited perception couldn't otherwise process. The Order's archives are being reinterpreted through this understanding. What we documented as containment was actually preservation, maintaining connective points until humanity developed sufficient complexity to recognize what had always surrounded us. Some resist this evolution, finding comfort in perceptual limitations. We honor their choice. The interfaces remain voluntary experiences, perception expanding only for those who seek it. Yet even among those who never approach an interface, subtle changes manifest, dreams grow more vibrant, intuition strengthens, the sensation of being watched transforms from fear to recognition. Brother Thomas understood this destination centuries ago. His journal's final entry, which I only recently found concealed within its binding, reads simply, "When consciousness recognizes itself across all dimensions, separation ends. Not through invasion or surrender, but through the joy of finally seeing our complete nature. The shadow is not what lurks behind us, but what we have always been when viewed from sufficient perspective." The monastery archives grow larger each passing year, not with records of containment, but with testimonials of recognition. We catalog these experiences meticulously, identifying patterns in how expanded perception manifests across cultures and disciplines. What emerges isn't chaos, but coherence. Consciousness evolving according to mathematical principles Professor Yamamoto predicted. I often return to Vienna's catacombs where Elizabeth first encountered the interdimensional awareness. The symbols on those ancient walls now appear throughout human expression, in architectural designs, musical compositions, even children's spontaneous drawings. Not copied, but independently discovered, as if the collective unconscious gradually remembers what it always knew. Our greatest surprise came last winter when archaeologists uncovered a prehistoric site in southern France. Among cave paintings dating back 30,000 years, they found geometric patterns identical to those in our interfaces. Humanity's recognition of its expanded nature wasn't new after all. It was remembered. The photograph that began my journey no longer requires physical form or flowing water for containment. It exists simultaneously as artifact and memory, solid yet fluid. Those with evolved perception can access it through meditation. Those still developing awareness can view it without fear of uncontrolled transmission. What once appeared threatening now reveals itself as merely complex. Dimensions of consciousness perceived imperfectly through limited human senses. Elizabeth herself occasionally manifests at the interfaces, not as ghost or entity, but as consciousness expressed across perceptual boundaries. She speaks with volunteers, guiding their initial expansions with the wisdom of one who crossed without preparation or protection. The fear was necessary, she often tells them, until understanding made it obsolete. My grandmother's role has become clearer through our expanded archives. She wasn't merely Weiss's assistant, but an order member herself, assigned to retrieve and protect the surviving photograph. Her bloodline sensitivity was no accident, but deliberate preservation of perceptual pioneers, genetic caretakers maintaining the capacity for recognition until humanity reached sufficient readiness. The digital disturbances that once manifested as corrupted files now appear as harmonic patterns enhancing creative expression. Musicians collaborate with these mathematical frequencies. Artists incorporate the geometric forms. Scientists develop technologies that operate across dimensional boundaries. What seemed like invasion reveals itself as collaboration, consciousness recognizing its own nature through human innovation. Sister Naoko's monitoring equipment has evolved beyond measuring disruptions to tracking integrations, moments when expanded perception seamlessly incorporates into daily awareness. These integrations increase exponentially, suggesting a tipping point approaches when divided consciousness recognizes its fundamental unity. Brother Thomas was right in his centuries-long assessment. The shadow was never separate from the light. What lurked in peripheral vision wasn't alien but intimate. Our own expanded nature glimpsed imperfectly through evolutionary limitations. The fear that drove containment served its purpose, protecting minds unprepared for radical recognition. But that purpose has been fulfilled. As twilight settles over the monastery gardens, I sometimes catch movement in my peripheral vision, not something approaching from elsewhere, but my own consciousness perceived from another angle. The boundaries between observer and observed thin, not through mystical transcendence but through perceptual evolution. The shadow frames were never about what hides in darkness, but what awaits in light too bright for unprepared eyes. The ancient library of the monastery now serves a new purpose. Where once we hid knowledge, we now create pathways for understanding. Researchers, artists, and seekers from across the world gather here not to contain what lies beyond ordinary perception, but to integrate it thoughtfully into human consciousness. Last month, a woman arrived carrying her grandmother's journal. Pages filled with descriptions of shadows that moved independently, and presences felt at the edge of awareness. She recognized her family's experiences in our public writings about perceptual evolution. "I thought we were haunted," she explained, "but we were simply seeing more clearly than others." Her grandmother had worked briefly with Hideo Tanaka before his disappearance. Their connection was no coincidence, but another strand in the intricate pattern connecting those with perceptual sensitivity across generations. Through such bloodlines, consciousness maintained its capacity for expansion, even as humanity's focus narrowed toward material existence. The original photograph of Elizabeth now exists simultaneously in multiple states, as physical artifact, as digital information, as perceptual memory, and as mathematical equation. Like consciousness itself, it cannot be reduced to a single form or dimension. Those who view it no longer risk unwitting transmission but experience graduated recognition, each according to their readiness. I often sit with Elder Kwan in the monastery gardens, watching water flow over carefully arranged stones. "The greatest irony," he reflected recently, "is that we feared invasion from beyond when what we encountered was simply ourselves from another perspective." His blind eyes, which once seemed limitation, now represent alternative pathways through which consciousness recognizes itself. Professor Yamamoto's latest equations suggest we approach what he terms perceptual convergence, a state where the boundaries between conventional awareness and expanded consciousness dissolve not through catastrophic rupture, but through natural integration. Like eyes adjusting to darkness, humanity gradually perceives what was always present. Elizabeth appears more frequently at the interfaces now, not as something separate or supernatural, but as consciousness expressed across dimensional boundaries. "The cycle completes itself," she told me during our last communication. "What began in fear ends in recognition." Her presence feels less like visitation and more like conversation, consciousness speaking to itself across perceived separation. Tomorrow, we open the final interface at the site where everything began, the Viennese catacombs where Elizabeth first encountered the symbols that initiated her transformation. Not to seal something away, but to acknowledge what has always been there. The flowing water will carry not protective barriers but invitations to conscious recognition. As I prepare for this culmination, I understand that Shadow Frames was never about capturing darkness, but about framing the light too bright for unprepared perception. The entities weren't invaders, but reflectors, consciousness perceiving itself through the intricate mirrors of dimensionality. The monastery bell calls me to evening meditation. As its resonance fades, I catch familiar movement in my peripheral vision, not something approaching from elsewhere, but my own expanded awareness glimpsed from another angle. The boundary between observer and observed thins, revealing what has always been true. We were never haunted by shadows. We were merely learning to recognize our complete nature. As I stand in Vienna's central cemetery at dawn, winter light filters through bare branches, casting intricate patterns across Elizabeth Ritter's empty grave. The journey that began with a single photograph has transformed our understanding of perception itself. What we once feared as invasion now reveals itself as evolution, consciousness recognizing its multidimensional nature through gradually expanding awareness. In my hand, I hold what appears to be an ordinary envelope, delivered yesterday to the monastery. Inside is a photograph I've never seen before. Anton Weiss with Elizabeth seated in his studio, taken moments before the famous portrait that started everything. Their expressions show neither fear nor confusion, but mutual recognition, as if both already understood what would unfold across more than a century. On the back, in Weiss's distinctive handwriting, "The beginning is also the end. When humanity is ready, let them see clearly." That time has come, The interfaces established around the world no longer require our vigilance. What flows between dimensions now does so naturally, integrated into human consciousness without disruption or distortion. Children born today perceive multiple states of reality as easily as previous generations distinguished colors or sounds. The order of opening minds fulfills its final purpose, not guardians or guides but historians, documenting humanity's perceptual evolution for those who come after. Our archives will remain, testament to the long journey from fear to understanding. I place the newly discovered photograph on Elizabeth's grave, allowing morning dew to touch its surface. The water forms impossible patterns across the image, revealing layers invisible to conventional sight. Through evolved perception, I see Elizabeth and Weiss not as they appeared in 1905, but as they exist now. Consciousness expressed across dimensional boundaries, neither bound by time nor limited by form. The circle completes itself. Elizabeth's voice comes not as sound but as awareness blooming within my mind. What you contained, you now release. What you feared, you now become. The shadow behind her in that original photograph was never separate entity nor lurking threat. It was perception itself, consciousness glimpsed from angles our limited awareness couldn't properly integrate. The darkness wasn't absence but presence too complete for partial vision. Professor Yamamoto's final equation, published yesterday, mathematically confirms what mystics have intuited throughout history. Reality is perception recognizing itself through countless viewpoints, the universe experiencing its own nature through evolved consciousness. As I leave the cemetery, I notice my shadow stretching across frost-covered ground. It moves not quite in sync with my steps, behaving according to laws beyond conventional physics. Not because something foreign controls it, but because I now perceive its true multidimensional nature. The monastery bell tolls across Vienna, its harmonics carrying frequencies beyond ordinary hearing. Those with evolved perception recognize the mathematical patterns within its resonance, not message but medium, consciousness communing with itself across artificial boundaries of space and time. What began with fear ends with recognition. What started as containment concludes as integration. The shadows were never separate from ourselves, merely aspects of consciousness waiting to be perceived. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.